The rain was coming down hard against the windows of Hartwell and Associates when my phone buzzed. I was deep in quarterly reports, the kind of mind-numbing spreadsheets that made my eyes burn after staring at them for hours. The Chicago skyline looked gray and unforgiving through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our 32nd floor office. "Nick Patterson speaking," I answered, not bothering to look at the caller ID. "Honey, it's your mom." Her voice was shaky, the kind of tremor that immediately made my stomach drop. "It's about Grandma Rose." I set down my pen and turned away from my computer screen. The numbers on the monitor suddenly seemed insignificant. "What happened?" "She passed away this morning, sweetie, peacefully, in her sleep." The words hit me like a physical blow. Grandma Rose had been the one constant in my chaotic childhood, the woman who taught me how to balance a checkbook and dream big at the same time. She was 87 and had been declining for months, but somehow I thought she'd live forever. "The funeral is Thursday," Mom continued. "I know you're busy with work, but I'll be there," I said without hesitation. "Of course I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the city below. People hurried along the sidewalks like ants, probably dealing with their own crises and heartbreaks. I thought about calling my supervisor, Janet Morrison, but she was in back-to-back meetings with the board. Instead, I sent her an email explaining the situation and requesting bereavement leave. 20 minutes later, Janet appeared at my cubicle. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that had earned her respect in a male-dominated industry. "I'm sorry for your loss, Nick," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Take all the time you need. The Johnson portfolio can wait." "Thank you, I should be back by Monday." "Don't worry about Monday either if you need more time." She paused, glancing around the nearly empty office. Most of my colleagues had already left for the day. "Your grandmother raised you, didn't she?" I nodded, surprised she remembered. "After my dad died when I was 12, she was everything to me." "Then honor her properly. Work will be here when you get back." That evening, I packed a small suitcase in my Lincoln Park apartment. The space felt too quiet, too sterile compared to Grandma Rose's cluttered house in Springfield where I'd spent so many summers. I found myself pulling out photo albums, looking at pictures of us baking cookies, her teaching me to drive in her ancient Buick, graduation day when she'd cried harder than anyone else in the audience. The 3-hour drive to Springfield the next morning gave me too much time to think. I kept replaying conversations with Grandma Rose, wondering if I'd visited enough, called enough, told her I loved her enough. The guilt was overwhelming, even though I'd seen her just 2 weeks ago. Mom was waiting for me at the funeral home, her eyes red-rimmed but trying to stay strong. We spent hours making arrangements, choosing flowers, writing an obituary that could never capture who Rose Patterson really was. She'd been a secretary at the state capitol for 40 years, a volunteer at 3 different charities, and the kind of neighbor who always had a casserole ready for anyone going through hard times. "There's something I need to tell you," Mom said as we sat in the funeral director's office, surrounded by pamphlets about caskets and memorial services. "Your grandmother left some things for you specifically. Legal documents," she said. "They're in a safety deposit box." "What kind of documents?" "I don't know. She was very secretive about it. Said you'd understand when the time came." Mom's voice carried a note of confusion. "She also mentioned something about your work, about being careful who you trust." A chill ran down my spine. Grandma Rose had always been sharp, but in her final months, she'd started saying strange things about my job at Hartwell and Associates. I'd assumed it was just an elderly woman worrying about her granddaughter in the big city. The funeral was beautiful and heartbreaking. The church was packed with people whose lives Grandma Rose had touched. I gave a eulogy that made half the congregation cry, talking about her strength, her wisdom, and her unconditional love. What I didn't mention was the growing unease in my stomach about those mysterious documents. After the burial, relatives and friends gathered at Mom's house for a reception. I found myself going through the motions, accepting condolences, sharing memories, but my mind kept drifting to that safety deposit box. Finally, when the crowd thinned out, Mom handed me an envelope. "The key and the paperwork," she said. "Box 247 at First National Bank." She insisted I wait until after the funeral to give this to you. I stared at the small brass key, wondering what secrets my grandmother had been keeping. The rational part of my mind said it was probably just old insurance policies and family documents. But something about the way she'd insisted on secrecy made me think otherwise. "I'm going to drive back to Chicago tonight," I told Mom. "I need to process all this." "Are you sure? You could stay another day. I need to be alone for a while, and I should check on things at work." The drive back to Chicago was lonely and dark. I kept the radio off, preferring the sound of rain against the windshield and my own troubled thoughts. Grandma Rose had always been protective of me, sometimes overly so. What could she have discovered that made her worried about my job? By the time I reached my apartment, a plan was forming in my mind. Tomorrow was Friday. I'd go to Springfield first thing in the morning, check the safety deposit box, and then decide whether any of this was worth worrying about. Maybe it was just the paranoid thoughts of an elderly woman, or maybe Grandma Rose had uncovered something that could change everything. As I fell asleep that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to become much more complicated. I woke up before my alarm, the gray dawn light filtering through my bedroom curtains. The dreams had been vivid and unsettling. Grandma Rose trying to tell me something important, her voice drowned out by the sound of office phones ringing endlessly. I'd been in finance long enough to know that when something felt wrong, it usually was. The drive back to Springfield felt different in daylight. The Illinois countryside stretched out on both sides of the highway, cornfields brown and stubbled from the recent harvest. I kept thinking about Grandma Rose's warnings about being careful who I trusted at work. It seemed ridiculous. Hartwell & Associates was one of the most respected investment firms in Chicago. Sure, the corporate world could be cutthroat, but I'd never seen anything that seemed genuinely corrupt. First National Bank in Springfield was the kind of solid brick building that had probably looked the same for 50 years. The teller, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, led me to the vault after checking my identification 3 times. "Your grandmother was a lovely woman," she said, as we walked through the heavy security door. "She came in here every few months, always very particular about her business." "How long did she have this box?" "Oh, at least 10 years, maybe longer." The teller inserted her key alongside mine in box 247. "She always said it was for her granddaughter's future." The box was larger than I'd expected, about the size of a shoebox. Inside were several manila folders, each labeled in Grandma Rose's precise handwriting. My hands were shaking as I lifted them out. For Nick, insurance. For Nick, family history. And most intriguingly, for Nick, work concerns. I signed for a private viewing room and spread the contents across the small table. The insurance folder contained exactly what I'd expected. Life insurance policies, social security documents, nothing surprising. The family history folder had old photographs, birth certificates, and a handwritten family tree going back to the 1800s. But the work concerns folder made my blood run cold. The first document was a newspaper clipping from 3 years ago. Hartwell & Associates under investigation for pension fund irregularities. I'd never seen this article. The investigation had apparently been dropped due to lack of evidence, but it detailed suspicious transactions involving several major corporate pension funds. Underneath were more clippings, all carefully dated and organized. Chicago investment firm settles fraud, claims quietly. Hartwell executive resigns amid scandal. Pension beneficiaries sue over missing funds. How had I missed all of this? I worked at Hartwell & Associates. I should have known about major investigations and scandals, but as I read through the articles, I realized they were from smaller financial publications, not the mainstream media. Someone had been very good at keeping these stories quiet. The most disturbing document was at the bottom of the folder. It was a photocopy of what looked like internal Hartwell memos, discussing something called Project Redirect. The language was deliberately vague, but it seemed to involve moving money between different client accounts to hide losses. One memo, dated just 6 months ago, mentioned Patterson account review and maintain current classification. My name. They were talking about something involving me. I sat back in the uncomfortable chair, my mind racing. How had Grandma Rose gotten hold of internal company memos? And what did Patterson account review mean? There was one more item in the folder, a handwritten letter on Grandma Rose's personal stationery. "My dearest Nick, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you finally opened this box. I hope I'm wrong about what I've discovered, but I fear I'm not. Your friend from college, Sarah Martinez, came to see me 6 months ago. She works for the Securities and Exchange Commission now, and she was investigating irregularities at your company. She showed me documents that made me very concerned for your safety. According to Sarah, your department has been used to legitimize questionable transactions. The Patterson account review she mentioned refers to you specifically. They've been monitoring your work to ensure you don't discover what's really happening. I made Sarah promise not to contact you directly. I was afraid that if your supervisors knew you were under investigation, they might do something drastic. But now that I'm gone, you need to know the truth. The other documents in this folder are copies of what Sarah shared with me. There's more evidence, but it's dangerous. If you decide to pursue this, be very careful who you trust at work. I love you more than words can say. Whatever you decide to do, know that you have the strength to handle it. You're stronger than you know. All my love, Grandma Rose, P.S. Sarah's direct number is 312-555-7429. She said to call her if anything happened to me. I read the letter 3 times before the full implications sank in. My grandmother had been protecting me from something at my own company. My college friend Sarah, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year, was an SEC investigator looking into Hartwell & Associates. And somehow I was right in the middle of it all. I pulled out my phone and stared at Sarah's number. Part of me wanted to call her immediately, but another part was terrified of what she might tell me. Once I made that call, there would be no going back to my normal life. The drive back to Chicago was a blur of anxiety and confusion. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, paranoid that someone might be following me. It was ridiculous. I was just a mid-level analyst who processed investment reports. What could I possibly know that would threaten anyone? But as I thought about my daily work, patterns began to emerge. The Johnson portfolio that Janet had mentioned. Why was it so important that it couldn't wait? And why did I always seem to get the clients with the most complex, hard-to-track investment structures? By the time I reached the Chicago city limits, I'd made my decision. I would call Sarah, but not from my apartment or my office. If Hartwell and Associates really was involved in something illegal, I needed to assume they might be monitoring my communications. I stopped at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, one I'd never been to before, and used their Wi-Fi to create a new email account. Then I walked 6 blocks to a different coffee shop and used their phone to call Sarah. Sarah Martinez. Sarah, it's Nick Patterson, from Northwestern. There was a long pause. Nick, oh my God, I'm so sorry about your grandmother. I was planning to come to the funeral, but she left me some documents, I interrupted. Documents about my company, about me. Another pause, longer this time. Where are you right now? A coffee shop in Lincoln Park. Don't go home tonight. Don't go to work tomorrow. Can you meet me somewhere public, somewhere busy? My heart was pounding. Sarah, what's going on? More than your grandmother knew. The investigation has expanded. We think Hartwell and Associates has been running a massive embezzlement scheme, and we think some of the evidence is in your office. In my office? Nick, we need to talk in person. Can you meet me at Navy Pier tomorrow morning? 10 o'clock by the Ferris wheel? I'm supposed to be back at work on Monday. Don't go back to work until we talk. Promise me. I closed my eyes, feeling my carefully ordered life crumbling around me. I promise. And Nick, if anyone from your company tries to contact you this weekend, don't answer. Don't give them any indication of what you know. After hanging up, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching people go about their normal Friday evening routines. Couples on dates, friends meeting for drinks, students studying for exams, all of them blissfully unaware that their problems were so much simpler than mine. I checked into a hotel near the airport, paying cash and using a fake name. It felt paranoid and dramatic, but Sarah's urgency had scared me. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling, I wondered what Grandma Rose would have told me to do. Probably the same thing she'd always taught me. When something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And when you discover the truth, you have a responsibility to act on it, no matter how difficult it might be. Saturday morning came too soon and not soon enough. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through possibilities and scenarios, none of them good. The hotel room felt like a prison, and I found myself checking the locks on the door obsessively. Navy Pier was crowded with tourists and families, which I supposed was exactly what Sarah had intended. I spotted her near the Ferris wheel, looking more serious and professional than I remembered from college. She'd always been driven, but now she carried herself with the confidence of someone used to dealing with dangerous situations. Nick. She gave me a quick hug, but her eyes were scanning the crowd around us. You look terrible. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. We walked toward the end of the pier, finding a relatively quiet spot near the railing overlooking Lake Michigan. The water was choppy and gray, matching my mood perfectly. Tell me everything, Sarah said. What exactly did your grandmother leave you? I pulled out photocopies of the most important documents from the safety deposit box. Sarah's expression grew more grim as she reviewed them. She was protecting you, Sarah said finally. Rose contacted me about 8 months ago. She said she was worried about your job, that she'd heard some rumors in Springfield about your company. What kind of rumors? Your grandmother was sharper than you probably realized. She still had friends in state government, people who heard things. When pension fund managers started asking questions about Hartwell and Associates, word got around. Sarah pulled out her own folder, much thicker than mine. What I'm about to show you is confidential SEC investigation material. If this gets out before we're ready to make arrests, people could disappear and evidence could be destroyed. Arrests? Nick, Hartwell and Associates isn't just involved in some minor accounting irregularities. We believe they've stolen over $40 million from pension funds over the past 5 years. They've been using a sophisticated system to move money between accounts, making it nearly impossible to track. She opened her folder and showed me a complex flowchart. Here's how it works. They take money from Pension Fund A, claiming it's being invested in a high-yield opportunity. Instead, they use that money to cover losses in Pension Fund B. Then they take money from Pension Fund C to cover Fund A, and so on. That's just a Ponzi scheme with extra steps. Exactly. But it's been incredibly well disguised. The only reason we caught on was because one pension fund manager got suspicious about consistently high returns during a market downturn. I studied the flowchart, and my stomach dropped as I recognized several account numbers. These are accounts I've processed reports for. That's why you're in danger, Nick. You've been handling the legitimate-looking paperwork that makes this scheme appear legal. Your reports, your analysis, your signature on documents, it's all been used to create a paper trail that hides what's really happening. But I would have noticed if the numbers didn't add up. Sarah shook her head. They've been very careful about what information you see. You get partial reports, selective data. Just enough to do your job, but not enough to see the bigger picture. A family walked past us, kids arguing about whether to ride the Ferris wheel or get ice cream. Their normalcy felt surreal compared to what Sarah was telling me. What about my supervisor, Janet Morrison? She has to know something. We're not sure how high this goes within the company. It could be just a few executives, or it could involve multiple departments. That's why we need your help. My help? We need someone on the inside. Someone who can access files and information without raising suspicion. Someone who has legitimate reasons to be reviewing account documents. I stared out at the lake, watching a sailboat struggle against the wind. You want me to spy on my own company? I want you to help us stop them from stealing retirement money from teachers and firefighters and city workers, people who can't afford to lose their life savings. The weight of what she was asking hit me. If they find out what I'm doing, we'll protect you. This investigation is almost complete. We just need a few more pieces of evidence to make sure our case is airtight. What kind of evidence? Sarah hesitated. We think there are backup files in the company's main server, files that show the real account balances and transaction histories, but we need someone with legitimate access to find them. I don't have access to the main server. I'm just a junior analyst. No, but you have access to terminals that connect to it. And you know the company's filing system, their procedures, their security protocols. I thought about Janet Morrison, about the other analysts I worked with every day. Were they innocent, or were they all part of this? How do I know who I can trust? You can't trust anyone at Hartwell & Associates. Assume everyone is either involved or being watched. A cold wind blew off the lake, and I pulled my jacket tighter. When would this happen? Soon. We're planning to execute search warrants within the next 2 weeks. If you're going to help us, it has to be before then. And if I say no? Sarah's expression softened. Then you say no. I won't pressure you, Nick. This is dangerous, and I understand if you don't want to get involved. But even as she said it, I knew I didn't really have a choice. If Hartwell & Associates was stealing from pension funds, and if my work had been used to facilitate that theft, then I was already involved whether I wanted to be or not. What would I have to do? Go back to work on Monday like nothing's happened. Act normal, do your regular job. But while you're there, look for anything unusual. File names that don't match their contents, accounts with suspicious activity, backup drives or servers you haven't seen before. She handed me a small device that looked like a USB drive. If you find anything, copy it to this. It's encrypted and untraceable. What if someone sees me? Then you tell them you're backing up your work files. It's a perfectly normal thing to do. I took the device, surprised by how light it felt for something that could potentially bring down my entire company. How do I contact you? Don't. I'll contact you. If something goes wrong, if you feel threatened in any way, call this number. She handed me a business card for a pizza place. Ask for Detective Rodriguez. That's my contact with Chicago PD. He'll know what to do. We walked back toward the shore in silence. I felt like I was in a movie, like this couldn't possibly be my real life. 3 days ago, my biggest worry had been getting the Johnson portfolio analysis done on time. Sarah, I said as we reached the parking area, why didn't you contact me directly? Why go through my grandmother? Because we knew Hartwell was monitoring some of their employees' communications. Phone records, emails, even social media. Rose was concerned that if we approached you directly, it might put you in immediate danger. And now? Now they think you're just a grieving granddaughter taking time off for a funeral. As long as you act natural when you go back to work, there's no reason for them to suspect anything. As I watched Sarah drive away, I realized that Grandma Rose had given me one final gift, the chance to do the right thing, even when it was scary and difficult. She'd always taught me that character was what you did when no one was watching, when it would be easier to look the other way. Now I was about to find out what kind of character I really had. Monday morning felt like stepping into a parallel universe. The same security guard nodded at me as I entered the Hartwell & Associates building. The same elevator music played as I rode up to the 32nd floor. The same coffee smell and keyboard clicking sounds greeted me as I walked to my cubicle. But everything was different now. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The way conversation stopped when I walked past certain offices. How some of my colleagues had expensive watches and designer clothes that seemed beyond what our salaries should support. The locked filing cabinets that I'd never questioned before suddenly seemed ominous. Nick! Janet Morrison appeared at my cubicle before I'd even logged into my computer. How are you holding up? I'm okay. Thank you for the time off. Of course. Your grandmother was lucky to have such a devoted granddaughter. Janet's smile seemed genuine, but I found myself analyzing every word, every gesture. I've got the Johnson portfolio ready for you when you're settled in. Actually, Janet, could I ask you something? I tried to keep my voice casual. I've been working on a lot of complex portfolios lately. Is there a reason I keep getting assigned the more complicated accounts? Something flickered in Janet's eyes, too quick to interpret. You're good at detail work, Nick. These clients need someone thorough. I appreciate the confidence. It's just that some of these investment structures are so complex, I sometimes wonder if I'm missing something important. That's why we have review processes. If there were any problems, they'd be caught upstream. Janet's tone had shifted slightly, becoming more formal. Focus on accurate data entry and analysis. That's your job. After she left, I stared at my computer screen, thinking about what Sarah had said. Just enough information to do my job, but not enough to see the bigger picture. Janet's response seemed to confirm that. I spent the morning working on routine tasks, trying to establish a normal pattern while keeping my eyes open for anything unusual. Around lunchtime, I decided to explore parts of the office I rarely visited. The records room was on the 31st floor, accessible with my standard employee keycard. It was filled with rows of filing cabinets and a few computer terminals for accessing archived files. I'd been here maybe 3 times in 2 years, always escorted by someone from the records department. Today, it was empty. I sat down at one of the terminals and logged in with my credentials. The system seemed standard, a database of client files organized by account number and date. I started with the Johnson portfolio, the account I was supposed to be working on. The files looked normal at first glance, but as I dug deeper, I noticed something odd. The transaction histories showed regular transfers between the Johnson account and several other accounts, but the amounts didn't match what I'd seen in my regular reports. According to my desktop files, the Johnson account had a balance of $2.3 million, but the records room terminal showed a balance of $1.8 million. $500,000 was just missing from the account. I checked another familiar account, the Morrison Municipal Pension Fund. Same thing. My regular reports showed higher balances than what appeared in the archived records. My hands were shaking as I inserted Sarah's USB device into the terminal. I copied everything I could find related to the accounts I regularly worked on, along with any files that seemed to contain transaction summaries or account reconciliations. Finding everything you need? I spun around so fast I nearly fell out of the chair. A man I'd never seen before was standing in the doorway, wearing an expensive suit and an unfriendly expression. I'm sorry, I was just looking up some client information, I stammered. I'm Marcus Webb, head of internal security. Mind if I ask what specific information you're looking for? My mouth went dry. Just transaction histories for the accounts I'm working on. I wanted to make sure my reports were complete. Marcus walked closer, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. That's unusual. Most analysts use the desktop system for current account information. Right, but I noticed some discrepancies and wanted to check the archive data. What kind of discrepancies? I was improvising now, trying to sound concerned but not suspicious. Balance differences between reports. Probably just timing issues with when transactions are recorded, but I wanted to be thorough. Marcus nodded slowly, but his expression didn't change. Very conscientious of you. In the future, though, any questions about account discrepancies should go through your supervisor first? Of course. Sorry, I didn't realize. No problem. We just like to keep track of who's accessing what information, for security purposes. I logged out of the terminal and tried to walk casually toward the elevator, but I could feel Marcus watching me every step of the way. In the elevator, I realized I was holding my breath. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on normal work, but my mind was racing. Who was Marcus Webb? And why had he appeared just when I was accessing the archived files? Was it a coincidence? Or was someone monitoring my computer activity? The afternoon dragged by. Every phone call, every conversation near my cubicle made me paranoid. When Janet stopped by around 4 o'clock, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Everything okay, Nick? You seem nervous. Just tired. It's been a long day getting back into the routine. Why don't you head home early? You've been through a lot this week. I wanted to argue, to seem dedicated and normal, but the offer was too tempting. Are you sure? Absolutely. The Johnson analysis can wait until tomorrow. As I packed up my things, I wondered if Janet was being genuinely considerate or if she wanted me out of the office for some other reason. Paranoia was becoming my default state. The train ride home was a blur of anxious thoughts. I kept checking to make sure the USB device was still in my pocket, and I found myself scanning the other passengers, wondering if any of them might be following me. My apartment felt like a sanctuary, but even there I didn't feel completely safe. I closed all the curtains and double-checked the locks before pulling out my laptop and the USB device. The files I'd copied were extensive, hundreds of documents showing transaction histories, account balances, and transfer records. It would take hours to go through everything, but even a quick scan confirmed what I'd suspected. Money was being moved between accounts in ways that didn't match the reports I'd been generating. The Morrison Municipal Pension Fund was the worst case. According to the archived records, the account had been systematically drained over the past 18 months. Small transfers, never more than a few thousand at a time, but they added up to nearly $1 million. These weren't abstract numbers anymore. These were real people's retirement savings. Teachers, firefighters, city workers who had trusted their money to Hartwell and Associates and had no idea it was being stolen. I thought about calling Sarah, but she'd told me not to make contact. Instead, I spent the evening organizing the files and trying to understand the full scope of what was happening. The more I learned, the more horrified I became. By the time I went to bed, I had a clear picture of how the scheme worked. Hartwell and Associates was managing dozens of pension funds, and they'd been using a sophisticated system to move money between them. When one fund needed to make payments to retirees, they'd transfer money from another fund to cover it. The problem was that they weren't just borrowing the money, they were taking it permanently, using it to cover their own losses and expenses. It was like a shell game with people's life savings, and it was only a matter of time before the whole thing collapsed. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that going back to work tomorrow was going to be even harder. Now that I knew what was really happening, every task, every report, every interaction with my colleagues would be tainted by the knowledge that I was working for criminals. But I also knew that Grandma Rose would have expected me to see this through. She'd spent the last months of her life trying to protect me and give me the tools to do the right thing. I couldn't let her down now. Tuesday morning brought an unwelcome surprise. When I arrived at my cubicle, there was a note from Janet asking me to see her in her office immediately. My first thought was that Marcus Webb had reported my activities in the records room. Janet's office was on the corner of the floor, with windows overlooking the Chicago River. She was on the phone when I knocked, but waved me in and pointed to a chair. "No, I understand the timeline," she was saying. "We'll have everything ready by Friday." "Yes, the Patterson files too." "Absolutely." My blood ran cold. She was talking about Patterson files. My files. "Sorry about that," Janet said after hanging up. "Crisis management. You know how it is. Everything okay? Just some regulatory compliance issues. Nothing that affects your work directly." She leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "How are you feeling about your workload lately? Any concerns or questions?" It was the same question she'd asked yesterday, but now it felt loaded with hidden meaning. "I'm managing fine. Why do you ask?" "Marcus Webb mentioned that you were in the records room yesterday, looking at archived files. That's a bit unusual for someone at your level. So it hadn't been a coincidence. They were monitoring my activities. I explained to Mr. Webb that I was checking some balance discrepancies. I wanted to be thorough." "That's admirable, Nick. But in the future, please bring any concerns to me first. We have protocols for account reconciliation, and going directly to the archives can sometimes cause confusion." "Of course. I didn't realize it was a problem." Janet's smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. "It's not a problem, just procedure. Speaking of which, I have a special project for you this week. We're doing a comprehensive review of all our municipal pension fund accounts." My heart started pounding. This couldn't be a coincidence. All of them? Every single account. I need detailed reports on current balances, recent transaction histories, and investment performance. It's a big job, but I think you're the right person for it. When do you need it completed? Friday. I know it's a tight deadline, but this review is critical for some upcoming meetings with regulators. They knew something was coming. This review wasn't about compliance. It was about covering their tracks before the SEC investigation became public. "I'll get started right away," I said. "Excellent. I've already had IT set up a temporary workspace for you in Conference Room B. All the files you'll need are there, along with a dedicated computer terminal. A dedicated workspace, away from my usual desk. Away from the records room and any other areas where I might stumble across information they didn't want me to see. Is there a reason I can't work from my regular cubicle? We need to maintain security protocols for this review. Conference Room B has enhanced data protection measures." Janet stood up, indicating the meeting was over. "I think you'll find everything you need there." Conference Room B was on the 33rd floor, one level up from the main office area. It was a sterile space with no windows, just a long table, a few chairs, and a computer terminal. Stacks of files were arranged neatly on the table, each labeled with a different pension fund name. I recognized most of them from my regular work: Morrison Municipal, Springfield Teachers, Chicago Fire Department, dozens of others. But seeing them all together like this, I realized for the first time how many pension funds Hartwell and Associates managed. Millions of dollars in retirement savings, all potentially compromised. The computer terminal was logged into a restricted system that only showed specific account information. I couldn't access the main database or any of the archived records I'd looked at yesterday. They were giving me just enough information to create the reports they wanted, nothing more. I spent the morning working through the files, but my real focus was on finding patterns that might help Sarah's investigation. The transaction histories were particularly revealing. I could see the complex web of transfers between accounts, money constantly moving in ways that made no legitimate business sense. Around noon, I heard voices in the hallway outside the conference room. I recognized Janet's voice, but the other speaker was unfamiliar, a man with a slight accent, possibly European. The Patterson review should be completed by Friday, Janet was saying. After that, we can implement the final phase. And you're certain she hasn't discovered anything problematic? The man asked. She's been asking some questions, but nothing that indicates real suspicion. Marcus thinks she's just being thorough. Nevertheless, we should be prepared for contingencies. The SEC investigation is moving faster than anticipated. My hands froze over the keyboard. They knew about the SEC investigation. How is that possible unless they had inside information? Do we know how much the feds actually have? Janet asked. Enough to be concerning, but not enough for indictments yet. Our contact says they're still gathering evidence, which gives us time to clean things up. Their contact. Someone at the SEC was feeding them information about the investigation. My stomach lurched as I realized the implications. If they had someone on the inside, Sarah might be walking into a trap. What about the Patterson girl? The man asked. She'll be fine as long as she doesn't dig any deeper. Her grandmother's death was fortuitous timing. The casual way Janet said it made my blood run cold. Grandma Rose had died of natural causes. Hadn't she? But the tone in Janet's voice suggested something darker. The voices faded as they moved down the hallway, but I sat frozen in my chair. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be managed, not a colleague. And the implication about my grandmother's death, I needed to get out of there. Now. But first, I had to copy more files. The USB device Sarah had given me was still in my pocket, and this might be my only chance to access all these pension fund records in one place. I worked quickly, copying transaction records, account summaries, anything that might be useful to the investigation. The files painted a clear picture of systematic theft over several years. Money from the pension funds was being diverted to shell companies, then used to cover losses in Hartwell's other investments. A sound in the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps approaching the conference room. I quickly ejected the USB device and shoved it into my pocket just as the door opened. Marcus Webb stepped into the room, followed by a man I'd never seen before. Tall, thin, with silver hair and cold eyes. This must be the man Janet had been talking to. Miss Patterson, the silver-haired man said with a slight smile. I'm Charles Hartwell, the company's founder. I wanted to personally thank you for your dedication during this difficult time. Charles Hartwell himself. I'd seen his picture in the company lobby, but he rarely appeared on the regular office floors. His presence here, now, couldn't be a coincidence. Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. I'm just trying to do my job. That's exactly what we need right now. Employees who understand the importance of discretion and loyalty. His eyes were studying my face intently. Janet tells me you've been asking some very thorough questions about account reconciliation. I want to make sure my reports are accurate. Of course. But sometimes, in complex financial operations like ours, it's important to trust that there are bigger picture considerations that individual analysts might not be aware of. It was a warning, politely delivered but unmistakably clear. I understand, I said carefully. I'm sure you do. You seem like a very intelligent young woman. Hartwell glanced at Marcus, some silent communication passing between them. I'm told your grandmother recently passed away. Please accept my condolences. Thank you. She must have been very proud of your success here. I imagine she worried about you, working in such a competitive industry. The way he said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't sympathy. It was a threat. She was always supportive of my career choices, I managed to say. I'm sure she was. Well, I don't want to keep you from your important work. Marcus tells me you're making excellent progress on the pension fund review. After they left, I sat alone in the conference room, my hands shaking. The message had been clear. They knew I'd been asking questions and they wanted me to stop. The reference to my grandmother felt like a veiled threat about what happened to people who caused problems. I needed to contact Sarah immediately, but not from the office. If they were monitoring my activities, any unusual behavior might trigger something worse than warnings. I spent the rest of the afternoon pretending to work on the reports while actually planning my exit strategy. I couldn't just walk out. That would be too suspicious. But I also couldn't stay much longer. Not after what I'd overheard. At 5 o'clock, I packed up my things and headed for the elevator. Janet appeared just as the doors were opening. Leaving already? I thought you might work late to get ahead on the review. I have a headache. Probably just stress from everything that's happened recently. Of course. Why don't you take tomorrow off as well? Grief can be overwhelming, and we want you at your best for this important project. Another warning disguised as concern. They wanted me away from the office, but I couldn't tell if it was to protect me or to protect themselves. That's very considerate, but I'd rather stay busy. It helps keep my mind off things. If you're sure. But promise me you'll go straight home and get some rest tonight. I promised. But as the elevator descended, I was already planning to do the exact opposite. I needed to find a secure way to contact Sarah and warn her about the leak in the SEC investigation. And I needed to do it before Hartwell & Associates realized I knew too much. The lobby was busy with employees leaving for the day. Everyone focused on their own concerns. I walked out of the building like any other worker heading home after a normal day at the office. But nothing about this day had been normal, and I had a sinking feeling that tomorrow would be even worse. As I reached the street, I glanced back at the Hartwell & Associates building. Somewhere up there, people were planning to destroy evidence, silence witnesses, and cover up millions of dollars in theft. And somehow, I'd become a threat they were prepared to eliminate. Grandma Rose had tried to protect me by giving me information, but she couldn't have known how deep this conspiracy went. Now I was on my own, carrying evidence that could bring down one of Chicago's most respected investment firms, if I could stay alive long enough to deliver it. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into a different hotel, this time using cash and a fake ID I'd gotten in college for underage drinking. It seemed ridiculous then, but now it might save my life. From the hotel room, I called the pizza place number Sarah had given me. "Tony's Pizza," a gruff voice answered. "I need to speak to Detective Rodriguez. It's about Nick Patterson." "Hold on." A few minutes later, a different voice came on the line. "This is Rodriguez. Sarah told me you might call. What's your situation?" "I think I'm in danger. The people I'm investigating know about the SEC case, and they have someone on the inside feeding them information." "Where are you right now?" I told him about the hotel. "I have evidence, financial records that prove the theft. But I think they're planning to destroy everything and disappear. Can you get to Sarah safely?" "I don't know. They might be watching me." "Okay, listen carefully. Stay in your hotel room tonight. Don't contact anyone from your work. Don't use your credit cards. Don't do anything that creates a digital trail. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., take the red line to the Fullerton stop. Sarah will meet you there." "What if they're following me?" "We'll have plainclothes officers watching the station. If anyone suspicious shows up, we'll handle it." After hanging up, I spent the night going through all the files I'd copied, organizing them into a coherent picture of the fraud scheme. By dawn, I had a complete understanding of how Hartwell & Associates had stolen over $40 million from pension funds across Illinois. The morning commute felt surreal. I was dressed like any other office worker, carrying a briefcase like I was heading to another normal day. But inside the briefcase were documents that could send a dozen people to prison for decades. Sarah was waiting at the Fullerton station, pretending to read a newspaper. She looked up as I approached, and I could see the tension in her face. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm alive. But Sarah, there's something you need to know about your investigation." We walked to a nearby diner, choosing a booth in the back where we could talk privately. I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the references to an SEC contact, the thinly veiled threats from Charles Hartwell himself. Sarah's face went pale as I spoke. If they have someone inside the SEC, then our entire investigation could be compromised. What does that mean? It means they know our timeline, our evidence, probably even our warrant requests. She was thinking out loud, working through the implications. We need to move much faster than planned. I slid the USB device across the table. This has everything. Transaction records, account balances, transfer histories for dozens of pension funds. Sarah plugged the device into her laptop and quickly scanned the files. "Nick, this is incredible. This is more evidence than we've gathered in 6 months of investigation. What happens now?" "Now we pray that our leak hasn't told Hartwell about this meeting." Sarah was typing rapidly, forwarding files to what I assumed were other investigators. "We're going to execute search warrants today, right now, before they have time to destroy anything else." "What about me? Do I go back to work?" Sarah looked at me seriously. "Nick, you can never go back to that job. After today, Charles Hartwell and everyone else involved will know that you're the one who brought them down. You'll need protection, probably witness relocation until the trials are over." The reality of it hit me. My career, my apartment, my entire life in Chicago, all of it was over. I thought about Grandma Rose, about how she'd sacrificed her own peace of mind to protect me and give me the chance to do the right thing. "It's worth it," I said. Those people trusted their retirement savings to Hartwell. They deserved to know the truth. Sarah smiled for the first time since I'd known her. Your grandmother would be proud of you. 2 hours later, I watched from a coffee shop across the street as FBI agents and SEC investigators swarmed the Hartwell and Associates building. People in business suits were led out in handcuffs, including Janet Morrison and Marcus Webb. I couldn't see Charles Hartwell from my vantage point, but Sarah texted me that he'd been arrested in his penthouse office. The news broke that evening. Major Chicago investment firm charged in $40 million pension fund fraud. The story dominated local headlines for weeks and eventually made national news when the full scope of the scheme became clear. Janet Morrison, it turned out, had been the mastermind behind the day-to-day operations, though Charles Hartwell had provided the overall strategy and connections. Marcus Webb had been in charge of surveillance and intimidation, making sure employees like me didn't ask too many questions. The SEC leak was a junior investigator who'd been bribed to provide inside information about the federal case. He was arrested the same day as the Hartwell executives. 6 months later, I testified before a grand jury about my role in uncovering the fraud. By then, I was living in Portland under a new identity, working as a financial analyst for a small nonprofit that helped seniors manage their retirement savings. It wasn't the high-powered career I'd imagined, but it felt meaningful in a way my old job never had. The trials took 2 years. Charles Hartwell was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Janet Morrison got 15 years. Most of the other conspirators received shorter sentences in exchange for their cooperation. The pension funds recovered most of their stolen money, though the legal process was long and complicated. I received letters from some of the retirees whose savings had been protected by the investigation. Reading their thanks, their relief that their retirement security was safe, made everything I'd been through worthwhile. On the second anniversary of Grandma Rose's death, I visited her grave in Springfield. I brought flowers and a copy of the newspaper article about the final sentencing in the Hartwell case. "We did it, Grandma," I said, placing the flowers on her headstone. "We stopped them." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice telling me she was proud, that I'd proven I was stronger than I knew. Walking back to my car, I thought about the folder that had started it all, the one that made the whole board go silent when they realized what I'd discovered during my grandmother's funeral. That folder had contained more than just evidence of corporate fraud. It had contained a lesson about courage, about standing up for what's right even when it's dangerous, about the responsibility we have to protect people who can't protect themselves. Grandma Rose had spent her final months gathering that evidence, knowing she might not live to see justice done, but she'd made sure I had the tools and the knowledge to finish what she'd started. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd never opened that safety deposit box, if I'd just thrown away those documents and continued my normal life. But I knew that wasn't really an option. Once you know the truth about something that important, you can't unknow it. You can only decide what you're going to do about it. I'd chosen to fight, and in the end, that choice had saved the retirement security of thousands of people I'd never met. It had cost me my old life, but it had given me something more valuable, the knowledge that when it mattered most, I'd done the right thing. As I drove away from the cemetery, I realized that Grandma Rose's final gift hadn't been the evidence in that folder. It had been the confidence to use it, the strength to see it through, and the understanding that sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody sees coming. They'd inspected my office while I was at my grandmother's funeral, looking for threats and vulnerabilities. But they'd missed the most important thing. They'd underestimated a 25-year-old analyst who'd learned from the strongest woman she'd ever known that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right, despite the fear. In the end, that lesson was worth more than any career, any amount of money, or any life I could have built on a foundation of willful ignorance. Grandma Rose had taught me that some things are more important than personal safety or professional success. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And she'd been absolutely right.